Have you ever felt your words were misinterpreted, judged out of context, or that your pain was overlooked? Job's wife, a figure often criticized in the Bible, bears this weight even today. Her few words, "Curse God and die," resonate as a cry of despair, but have we truly understood what lay behind them? Here's the controversy. What if she isn't the weak or ungrateful woman many believe her to be, but one of the most human and revealing characters in this story? Get ready to uncover how her pain mirrors our own struggles with grief, resilience, and faith in the face of insurmountable challenges. This isn't an invitation to defend or condemn her actions, but to see the common humanity she shares with us. After all, how many of us have faced moments when our faith faltered, and the weight of suffering felt unbearable? Perhaps the deepest lesson here is one of empathy and restoration, and how even the darkest despair can hold the seed of a new beginning. If you think you already know the story, it might be time to look again. Because behind the criticism lies a figure who challenges us to reflect on our own responses to pain. Are you ready to embark on a journey that will challenge your beliefs and offer a fresh perspective? When we think about Job's wife, it's easy to overlook her humanity due to her few mentions in Scripture. However, her words carry a depth that goes beyond the surface. Imagine someone who has lost everything: children, financial security, and even their partner's health. Although the Bible doesn't elaborate on her thoughts, she reflects something we all understand: the experience of grief and the struggle for resilience amid overwhelming pain. Have you ever considered what it would be like to stand in her shoes? It's not just about understanding but feeling the weight of that reality. Many judge her for what she said, but have they ever reflected on what drove her to speak? It's interesting to consider that pain isn't just an emotion, it's a catalyst for words and actions we often don't even recognize in ourselves. Job's wife reminds us of humanity's fragility, and her reactions are profoundly human. How many times have we spoken out of the heat of the moment? It could be during a traffic argument or a tough day at work. Instead of condemning her, perhaps we should seek to understand the context. There's something powerful in realizing her story is, in fact, our story. In a world that demands strength and perfection, Job's wife teaches us that admitting weakness is part of the process. For those facing enormous challenges, like losing a job or a loved one, her story serves as a reminder that we are all vulnerable. It's as if the Bible offers us a mirror to recognize our shared humanity. Have you ever stopped to consider how you respond in moments of crisis? Perhaps the most striking point is realizing her words were not just a critique, they were a cry of pain. Imagine losing everything and still bearing the pressure of standing by someone who is also suffering deeply. It's like trying to anchor a drifting boat in the middle of a storm. In such moments, faith can be challenged, but it is in this challenge that lessons are found. Isn't that something we all face? Those moments when the heart breaks, and resilience is pushed to its limits. However, we should not look at her solely through critical eyes. Instead, we should seek empathy. She represents the people around us who are silently battling invisible struggles. How do you react when someone near you is crying out for help but doesn't know how to express it? Perhaps the true lesson here is the ability to extend a hand, even when we don't fully understand someone else's pain. This connects us to the idea of empathy, feeling another's struggle as if it were our own. Interestingly, the lack of more details about Job's wife challenges us to imagine. Who was she beyond the pain? Did she find restoration after the tragedy? These questions lead us to reflect on our own stories. In moments of crisis, who do you become? Such reflection helps us approach life with greater compassion and less judgment. After all, we all carry battles the world doesn't see. Could she be a representation of our own fight for shared humanity? And so, we come to a crucial question. Can we view this figure with more generous eyes? She reminds us that even the harshest words have roots in genuine feelings. If we learn to embrace others' pain rather than dismiss it, we might discover new ways to build relationships and live with more grace. But what happens when grief becomes something larger, something that threatens even faith during challenges? That's what we must explore further. Loss, when it arrives, does not ask permission. It simply settles in, shatters certainties, and transforms daily life into something unrecognizable. For Job's wife, grief was more than an isolated experience. It was an avalanche of simultaneous losses. Her children, her financial stability, and even her husband's health were taken from her without warning. It's hard to fathom the weight of such suffering, but many of us have felt a fraction of it at different moments. Whether it's the loss of a loved one, a dream, or a phase of life, Pain has the power to redefine us. How we respond to it shapes who we become. In many ways, her grief was brutally human. She didn't have time to process each loss individually. Everything came at once, like an unrelenting storm. Now, think about your own life. How many times have you faced challenges that seemed insurmountable? Maybe not on the same scale, but even the small losses of daily life, like missing out on an important project at work, can carry that hollow feeling. What her story teaches us is that feeling crushed by pain is not a failure. It is part of the human process. Her reaction, often misunderstood, is a genuine reflection of what anyone might experience in the face of overwhelming sorrow. When she said, "Curse God and die," could it have been a plea for relief? A desperate cry for an escape from pain? We often condemn her words, but wouldn't it be wiser to see them as a cry for help? Like someone shouting for air amid a consuming fire, seeking relief as the flames engulf everything around them. Have you ever been in that place, where words escape before you can filter them? The way society often judges grief reactions highlights how much we need to learn about empathy. After all, who are we to dictate how someone should respond to loss? In Job's wife's case, the depth of her sorrow reminds us that sometimes strength isn't about hiding suffering but surviving it. Are there people in your life facing loss right now? Perhaps this is a good moment to ask how you can be there for them. Interestingly, the narrative of Job's wife also reveals something about our expectations of faith and suffering. How often do we expect someone to keep calm or stay strong, without understanding what that truly demands? Loss has the power to shake even the most resilient among us. This is why we must learn to create spaces where people can process their pain without fear of judgment. Think about how you can be that safe space for someone close to you. There is something almost universal about how grief both unites and isolates us. Job's wife, with her striking words, shows us that even in our deepest despair, there is a connection to the human experience as a whole. Perhaps she didn't have the perfect words, but who would? It's a reminder that healing doesn't come from perfection but from the honesty of confronting pain. Have you considered how this applies to your own experiences of loss? And then comes the question, what follows such immense pain? Is it possible to find a path to restoration? The journey of Job's wife challenges us to look beyond immediate suffering and imagine what might rise from the ashes. But first, we must understand the complex relationship between faith and despair. How can one maintain faith through such devastating trials? This is a question that demands deeper reflection and leads us directly into the next chapter of her story. Curse God and die. This brief, pain-laden phrase lingers in the minds of those who read Job's story. But should these words be interpreted as a rejection of faith or as a cry of despair? Job's wife, facing unimaginable suffering, invites us to explore the limits of faith under extreme challenges. She was not a non-believer but someone whose reality had been so brutally crushed that any trace of hope seemed unreachable. How many times have you felt like that, when even believing feels like an impossible effort? Her words are often treated as blasphemy, but what if we view them through a different lens? What if she was expressing what many don't dare admit, the weight of despair? Think about the everyday situations where pain makes us question everything. Losing a loved one or facing a financial crisis can drive anyone to ask, why? Wouldn't it be fair to acknowledge that sometimes questioning is the only way to process pain? Job's wife challenges us to be honest with our own doubts. Faith, after all, is not the absence of questions but the ability to move forward even when everything seems lost. When we look at Job's wife, we don't just see words of despair. We see the internal struggle between common humanity and the need to believe in something greater. How many times have you walked through a valley of uncertainty, where each step felt heavier than the last? Perhaps you relate to her more than you realize. In this light, her faith may have been far more complex than we initially judge. It's not easy to believe when everything falls apart, but it's also not easy to completely abandon belief in something greater. Maybe her words weren't a denial of God but a way to confront what seemed unbearable. Have you ever faced your own faith honestly, even in your darkest moments? Her story reminds us that faith and pain can coexist. Interestingly, it is in moments of deepest despair that the greatest lessons often emerge. Job's wife teaches us that faith isn't an unattainable ideal but something profoundly human, shaped by our toughest experiences. In your life, where have you found the strength to keep
going? Perhaps it was in a kind word, an unexpected act of generosity, or even in a silence full of meaning. Faith, like despair, is part of what makes us human. If we examine closely, Despair can be a form of connection with God, even when it seems like the opposite. Job's wife expressed her pain in the only way she could at that moment. But did that distance her from God, or did it create space for deeper reflection? Think of the times you've cried out into the void, hoping for an answer. Those moments, while difficult, can be transformative if we allow them to be. This brings us to a crucial point: resilience through suffering. Job's wife shows us that despair doesn't have to be the end, but can instead be a chapter in a greater journey. What comes after shouting to the heavens? Can pain be transformed into strength? These questions prepare us to understand how she and Job continued their journey, not as defeated individuals, but as examples of faith that endures even in the deepest darkness. Resilience is a powerful word, but its essence is only truly understood when we face suffering head-on. Job's wife, amidst devastating losses, remained by her husband's side. Perhaps silently, perhaps without recognition, but she stayed. That alone is an extraordinary act of strength. It's not easy to carry pain while the world crumbles, yet her survival is a lesson in humanity's capacity to endure, even when all seems lost. Have you ever reflected on the small acts of perseverance in your own life that serve as examples of resilience? The Bible's silence about her after those initial words is intriguing, yet deeply meaningful. It challenges us to imagine how she endured these trials. And therein lies the beauty. We don't need explicit answers to recognize the inherent strength in simply continuing to live. Sometimes, resilience is nothing more than getting up each day, even when every fiber of your being wants to give up. Think of a difficult moment you've overcome. How did you find strength when it felt like there was none left? There's an almost invisible yet profoundly human aspect to how she navigated such suffering. She wasn't just grieving her own pain but also bearing the weight of seeing Job, her partner, endure indescribable agony. Imagine the strength required to carry that burden. Perhaps you know someone like this, a mother fighting for her child, a friend supporting another through dark times. Resilience often appears as quiet but vital support. It's important to remember that resilience does not mean the absence of pain. On the contrary, it manifests amidst pain, like a small flame refusing to be extinguished. Job's wife represents that flame. Despite the evident despair in her initial words, she persisted. Isn't that how we often face our own battles? Each day becomes a choice to endure, even when the path is steep and full of challenges. Interestingly, resilience doesn't come out of nowhere. It is built. In Job's wife's case, we might imagine her strength stemming from love for her family, memories of happier times, or perhaps a quiet hope. Think about your own life. Where does your strength come from in difficult moments? Is it faith, close friends, or something deeper within you? Resilience is like a muscle that grows stronger with every challenge overcome. But resilience is not just about survival. It's about how those experiences shape us. Job's wife, though sparingly mentioned, hints that it is possible to emerge from tragedy with renewed strength. This doesn't mean the pain disappears, but that we learn to carry it differently. What have you learned from the hardest moments in your life? It's fascinating to think that sometimes the greatest victory is simply continuing to move forward. And so, the question arises, how can we transform this strength into something that inspires empathy and understanding? Job's wife's story invites us to look beyond appearances, to recognize the shared humanity in our struggles. But what happens when we begin to see suffering not merely as something to be endured but as a tool for learning and growth? This reflection leads us to explore the profound lessons of empathy her story offers. Job's wife offers us a silent yet powerful invitation to look at another's suffering with empathy. Instead of judging her desperate words, why not see the heart behind them? After all, we all have moments when pain makes us say or do things that don't truly reflect who we are. How many times have you regretted something you said in a moment of tension? That's the point. Empathy begins when we understand that someone's reaction might be a reflection of pain we cannot see. Her story challenges us to let go of judgment. This isn't easy, of course, because society often teaches us to evaluate actions without considering the context. But when we look closer, we see that despair is a universal language. Think about someone close to you who has gone through a crisis. How did you handle it? Were you quick to offer comfort, or did it take time to understand what that person truly needed? Empathy requires more than words. It demands attention. Job's wife also reminds us that everyone experiences suffering uniquely. Two people might endure the same tragedy, but their reactions will differ. For her, Grief was so overwhelming that it made her question everything. And that's not weakness, it's humanity. Have you ever reflected on how you handle your own pain compared to others? This contrast is an opportunity to practice compassion. After all, everyone carries their burdens differently. But empathy isn't just about understanding another's pain. It's about responding in ways that reflect that understanding. Imagine if Job had reacted harshly to his wife's words instead of showing patience. The same applies to us. How can we be more compassionate to those around us? Maybe it's listening without interrupting, offering practical help, or simply being present. The impact of a simple gesture can be transformative. What makes empathy so powerful is that it builds a bridge between two human experiences. When we look at Job's wife, we see more than a biblical character. We see someone who could be our mother, sister, or friend. This challenges us to rethink how we respond to others' suffering. Instead of asking, "Why did she say that?" perhaps we should ask, "What would I do in her place?" This shift in perspective can be life-changing. Here's an uncomfortable truth. We all fail at being empathetic at some point. Maybe we were too busy, too distracted, or simply didn't know how to respond. Job's wife's story gives us a chance to reflect and improve. Why not start today? Think of someone who's facing difficulties and find a way to show care. It could be a message, a visit, or even a silent prayer. Ultimately, empathy leads us to a deeper understanding of life. Suffering is not something we need to face alone. Job's wife reminds us that even in the midst of pain, there are ways to connect. But how can we transform that empathy into something that truly promotes healing and restoration? That's where the next reflection takes us. How suffering can be a pathway to renewal. Restoration is a silent promise we often forget amidst the chaos. The story of Job and his wife challenges us to believe that, even after tragedy, rebuilding is possible. Imagine the emptiness she must have felt after losing her children, her home, and the stability she once knew. Yet, the narrative encourages us to see that the ending doesn't have to be a verdict. It can be a new beginning. How many times in your own life has something that seemed lost transformed into an unexpected opportunity? The process of restoration isn't quick, nor should it be. It's like rebuilding a house after an earthquake, brick by brick, with patience and care. For Job's wife, this may have meant learning to live with her pain while witnessing life renew itself around her. Think of something you've had to rebuild, a relationship, a career, or even your self-confidence. Restoration isn't about erasing what happened, but about discovering new meaning in its wake. It's fascinating how restoration doesn't erase the memory of suffering but redefines its significance. For Job and his wife, the return of prosperity and children didn't replace their previous losses. Instead, it stood as a testament that life can go on. It reminds us that healing isn't about forgetting but about learning to live with the scars. Have you ever considered how your own scars could be symbols of strength rather than fragility? Restoration also requires effort. It's not something that simply happens. It's a daily choice. For Job's wife, staying by his side, even after her moments of despair, was an act of courage. Perhaps she found strength in faith or her love for her family. And you? Where do you find the strength to carry on? Maybe it's in your spirituality, close friends, or even small acts of self-care. In a world where pain often feels final, restoration reminds us that there's always room for a new chapter. For Job and his wife, it wasn't just about regaining material possessions but renewing their lives together. What in your life needs restoration? It could be something simple, like rediscovering a lost routine, or something profound, like rebuilding trust in yourself or others. What matters most is taking the first step, no matter how small it might seem. Interestingly, restoration isn't just personal. It can also be collective. Job's story isn't just about him. It's about the rebuilding of his family. This invites us to consider how we can help restore something for someone close to us. Perhaps you know someone struggling to start over. How can you be an instrument of renewal for that person? Sometimes, a simple act of kindness is the spark they need for a new beginning. And so, restoration ties into the idea of shared humanity. We all face losses and challenges, but we also share the capacity to begin anew. Job's wife, even in her moments of fragility, symbolizes this strength. But what happens when we see restoration not just as an ending but as the start of something greater? This leads us to explore the human impact of our journeys and how they teach us about the profound connection between pain and purpose. There's something profoundly universal in the story of Job's wife. Though it is a narrative from centuries ago, her struggles and pain reflect emotions we've all felt at some point. This common humanity, the invisible thread that binds us, emerges when we look beyond words and see the heart of a person. In her case, we see a woman enduring the unbearable and yet standing by her husband. And in your own life, have you ever stopped to consider how your personal battles connect to the stories of those around you? The beauty of common humanity is that it reminds us we're not alone. Even the most overwhelming emotions, grief, despair, and doubt, are shared by others on some level. Job's wife reminds us of this. Her story, though brief, is rich with meaning because it encapsulates the essence of the human experience. How many times have you thought you were the only one facing a particular challenge, only to discover others have been through the same? This concept is what makes empathy so powerful. When we understand that everyone carries burdens, it becomes easier to create space for compassion and acceptance. Job's wife, through her pain, teaches us that every human reaction, no matter how perplexing, has a reason. Think about someone you judged quickly in the past. What might have happened if you'd looked deeper, seeking the story behind their actions? It's fascinating how biblical stories are crafted to transcend time and place. They speak of common humanity in ways that still resonate today. In the case of Job's wife, her struggle reflects our own quest to find meaning amid pain. It's as if her story says, "You're not alone in this." And that message is as needed today as it was in Job's time. When was the last time you truly connected with someone by sharing your own struggles? Common humanity also invites us to reflect on the purpose of suffering, not as something to glorify, but as a tool to remind us of our connection to one another. Job's wife challenges us to view pain differently, as a meeting point between ourselves and others. How could you use your own experiences of pain to connect with someone going through something similar? Sometimes, sharing a story is the beginning of mutual healing. Interestingly, common humanity isn't just about pain but also about hope. Job's wife reminds us that even in the darkest moments, there is a shared light within all of us. That light is the innate desire to carry on, to seek restoration, and to find purpose again. Think of times when you helped someone overcome a difficulty. How did that strengthen your own resilience? Helping others connects us to the best of our humanity. And then comes the question, how can we use this common humanity to create lasting impact? The story of Job's wife leaves us with more questions than answers. But perhaps that's the point. What happens when we recognize the connection between our stories and the stories of others? Maybe, by understanding another's struggle as a reflection of our own, we can begin to see the world in an entirely new way, one that prepares us for greater and more impactful actions. And now that you've delved deeply into the story of Job's wife, what will you do with this new perspective? Your life is filled with moments that test your faith, resilience, and ability to connect with others' pain. Her story reminds us that we are all flawed, yet incredibly strong. Suffering can either crush us or transform us. It all depends on how we choose to face it. Think about this. Who around you might be silently crying out for empathy and understanding? Maybe it's time to take action. Whether it's offering a kind word, an unexpected gesture of compassion, or perhaps forgiving someone you've judged unfairly, true restoration begins when we create space to understand and embrace the weaknesses of others, and our own. So here's a challenge. How can you use this story to transform how you approach your own struggles? And how can you apply this perspective to the lives of others? If this reflection sparked something within you, don't let it fade here. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and join us as we continue exploring stories like this one. Stories that uncover profound lessons about humanity and faith. Because there's so much more to learn, and you won't want to miss it.